I sat at the head of my own dining table, invisible in plain sight. Savannah slid a nursing home brochure across the mahogany, smirking about my fading memory. She believed her money could erase me from my own home. But as the family chuckled nervously, I gripped my fork, ready to ask the single question I had spent 3 months preparing. It was the question that would shatter her perfect life right there on the dinner plates. My name is Margaret Holloway, though for the last 2 hours, I had simply been the invisible object at the head of my own dining table. Outside the bay windows, the sun was setting behind the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, casting long, bruised shadows across Willow Creek. But inside, the air was stiflingly hot. I was 67 years old. I had built this house with my late husband, paid for every beam and every brick. Yet tonight, I felt more like an unwanted guest who had overstayed her welcome. Savannah sat to my right, occupying the seat of power she had claimed for herself the moment she married my son. My daughter-in-law was a vision of modern success, draped in a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her hair was perfectly highlighted, her skin glowing with expensive treatments, but her eyes were cold, calculating sharks swimming in a sea of blue. Honestly, Maggie, you are just embarrassing yourself now, Savannah said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She did not look at me. She was busy smoothing out a glossy brochure on the tablecloth. You are confused. You do not understand money in this economy. Inflation is up nearly 9%. The markets are volatile, and you are still trying to balance a checkbook like it is 1980. I looked down at my plate, letting my shoulders slump intentionally. Around the table, my cousins and a few neighbours shifted in their seats, studying their roast beef with intense fascination. They were good people, mostly, but they were terrified of Savannah. Her family owned half the commercial real estate in the county, and her husband, my son, managed their portfolios. I think Mom is doing okay. Mostly, Luke said, though his voice lacked any real conviction. He looked at me, then quickly darted his eyes away when Savannah turned her head. Okay. Savannah laughed, a harsh, dry sound. Luke, wake up. Look at this. She picked up a document from the pile beside her plate and held it up for the room to see. It was a proposal for the Whispering Pines Senior Living Facility. This is the best solution for everyone, Savannah announced, reading from the brochure like she was chairing a board meeting. Round-the-clock care, assisted living. It is $5,000 a month, but we are willing to liquidate some assets to cover it. It is irresponsible to leave her here alone when she is clearly slipping. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. My niece, Sarah, offered a tight, pained smile, but said nothing. Savannah, honey, Luke started, his voice barely a whisper. Maybe we can discuss this later. Savannah did not even blink. She just stared at him until he shut his mouth and took a long sip of his wine. The power dynamic was clear to everyone in the room. My son had traded his spine for a comfortable lifestyle a long time ago. She turned her attention back to me, her expression shifting into a mask of fake concern. It was a performance, and I was the prop. Do you even remember your own bank account password, Maggie? Or should I just log in and help you with that too? She asked loudly. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter went around the table. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a mix of genuine anger and staged humiliation. I needed her to think she had won. I needed her arrogant. I think I have it written down somewhere. I stammered, making my hand tremble as I reached for my water glass. I let the glass clink against the plate, spilling a few drops. See. Savannah sighed, gesturing at my shaking hand. She pulled another stack of papers from her bag. I found these in your desk. Overdue electric bills. Second notices from the water company. You are forgetting to pay them. Maggie. You are a financial liability to yourself. I stared at the papers. I knew exactly why they were unpaid. I had not seen a utility bill in 2 months because someone had been intercepting my mail. My landline had been mysteriously out of order for weeks, preventing any collection calls from coming through. She had engineered this crisis perfectly. Savannah leaned back, crossing her arms. She looked around the table, basking in her victory. She had stripped me of my dignity, painted me as senile, and silenced my defenders. She thought the game was over. I stopped shaking. I set my water glass down firmly on the table. Slowly. I lifted my head and looked directly into her eyes. The fog of old age I had been projecting evaporated instantly. The room grew still. The clinking of silverware stopped. I opened my mouth and asked her one single question. It was spoken softly, clearly, and without a trace of hesitation. It hit the air like a match thrown into a room full of gas. Savannah's smug smile vanished. Her face hardened into something unrecognizable, and the color drained from her cheeks. The entire table froze. The air suddenly sucked out of the room by the sheer weight of my words. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, unable to form a response. I picked up my napkin and gently dabbed the corner of my mouth. That question, I had been preparing it for 3 months. To understand how we reached that explosive dinner? You have to go back 5 months. I was not always the trembling old woman Savannah mocked at the table. I was Margaret Holloway, a retired head nurse who had run the emergency floor of a busy private hospital for 30 years. I lived alone in the log cabin my husband and I had built. A sturdy place surrounded by blue spruce trees with a front porch that faced the jagged silhouette of the Rocky Mountains. It was a good life. I had my garden, my books, and my independence. Then there was Luke. My only son worked in financial technology in Denver. We used to be close, sharing coffee and stories on Sunday mornings. But after he married Savannah, he became a ghost. He was always in a rush, checking his watch, vibrating with the anxiety of a man trying to keep up with a lifestyle he could barely afford. Savannah was a different creature entirely, the daughter of a local real estate mogul. She had grown up with private drivers and country clubs. Now, she styled herself as a lifestyle entrepreneur on social media. She had hundreds of thousands of followers who watched her unbox luxury handbags. Yet I often noticed a tightness in her jaw when the bill arrived at family dinners. She claimed money was no object, but she smelled like stress. In the beginning, she was terrifyingly sweet. She would arrive at my doorstep with baskets of organic skincare products and expensive teas. You need to prioritize your mental health. Mum, she would say, her voice dripping with syrup. Let me take you to the spa. You worked so hard for so long. You deserve to be pampered. It felt nice to be cared for. So I let my guard down. Slowly. The conversation shifted from facials to finances. It started innocently enough. Oh, Maggie. Don't worry about logging into that old computer. She told me one afternoon while we sat in the kitchen. Just give me your email password and I can filter out the spam for you. It is so dangerous these days with all the hackers. Next came the driving. Mom, honestly, do you think it is safe for you to drive that old sedan on these icy roads? She asked, frowning at my car in the driveway. Why don't you sell that back lot? You could use the cash to just Uber everywhere. It is about your safety. A prickle of unease started in my gut. I loved my car, and I had no intention of selling the land my husband and I had bought for our 20th anniversary. Still, I wanted peace. I wanted to be the easygoing mother-in-law. So I let her help with the grocery apps and the streaming services. But I drew a hard line in the sand regarding the deed to the house, my retirement accounts, and my life insurance. Those were my business. The mask slipped for the first time on a Tuesday afternoon. Savannah had brought over a thick stack of paperwork. "This is just a standard limited power of attorney," she said casually, clicking a gold pen. "It just lets me talk to the utility companies for you so you don't have to wait on hold for 40 minutes. I put on my reading glasses and scanned the document. It was not limited. It was broad. It would have given her control over almost everything. "Savannah, I appreciate the help, but I can make my own phone calls," I said firmly, pushing the papers back. "I am not signing this." Her smile didn't just fade, it snapped off. "You are being incredibly difficult," she hissed, slamming the folder shut. "I am trying to help you. You are 67 years old, Maggie. You are not going to be sharp forever. Why do you have to be so stubborn?" I looked at Luke, who was standing by the fireplace. He looked at the floor, studying the pattern of the rug as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "Luke," I asked. "Mom, she is just trying to be efficient." Luke mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. That was the moment I realized I was on my own. If I fell, he would not catch me. He was too afraid of her. As Savannah gathered her things to leave that day, she didn't look at me. She looked past me. Her eyes scanned the living room, lingering on the high vaulted ceilings, the original stone fireplace, and the panoramic view out the window. It chilled me to the bone. That was not the look of a daughter-in-law visiting family. It was the cold, calculating stare of an investor appraising a distressed asset. It started with the small things, the kind of trivial annoyances you brush off as bad luck until they pile up into a mountain of evidence. Important letters began to vanish. My property tax notice, which arrived like clockwork every January for 40 years, never showed up. Then came the phone calls from the bank. A polite young woman asked me to verify a change of contact information. I did not ask to change my email address, I told her, gripping the receiver tight. "That is strange. Mrs. Holloway," she replied. "We received a digital request to route all notifications to a secure Proton mail account 3 days ago. I fixed it. But the unease settled in my stomach like a cold stone. A week later, I went for my quarterly checkup. Dr. Evans, who had known me since I was a head nurse in his ER, frowned at his tablet. "Maggie, how are you tolerating the new blood pressure medication?" he asked. I stared at him. What new medication? I have been on the same dosage for 5 years. He spun the screen around. Someone had logged into the patient portal and requested a switch to a cheaper generic brand, citing financial hardship. My hands started to sweat. Someone was curating a digital version of my life that I did not recognize, painting a picture of a woman who was broke and confused. Then, the danger jumped from the digital world to the physical one. I was driving to the supermarket on a Tuesday morning. As I approached a red light at the intersection of Main and 2nd, I pressed the brake pedal. It went soft. It sank all the way to the floor mat without resistance. Panic surged through me. I pumped it frantically. swerving onto the gravel shoulder to avoid rear-ending a pickup truck. The car groaned and skidded to a halt inches from a ditch. I took it to Mike, a mechanic I had trusted for 20 years. He wiped grease from his hands with a rag and looked at me gravely. "Maggie, your caliper bolt was missing," Mike said, keeping his voice low, "and the threading was stripped. Bolts do not just fall out like that. It looks like someone took it off and put it back on, loosely, like they did a rush job." My heart hammered against my ribs. When I told Savannah about it later that afternoon, expecting shock or concern, she just sighed and patted my arm with a condescending rhythm. "Mom, you are so dramatic sometimes," she said, shaking her head. "You probably just forgot to get it serviced. Old cars break down. Maybe it is time we talk about you not driving anymore. It is clearly too much for you to handle." That was when I knew. She was not just waiting for me to fail. She was accelerating the process. I went back to my roots. I bought a small black notebook and started documenting everything. Just like I used to document patient vitals. I recorded dates, times, missing mail, and strange phone calls. One afternoon, my neighbor Doris came over for tea. Doris was a 72-year-old Irish-American widow with eyes like a hawk and a mind sharper than a razor. She listened to my story, her expression darkening. "Maggie, listen to me," Doris said, leaning over her cup. "My nephew did this to me 5 years ago. He tried to convince everyone I was losing my marbles so he could get power of attorney. Do not trust them. Check your credit report." We sat at my kitchen table and pulled up the report on her tablet. There it was. An inquiry for a platinum credit card made 2 weeks ago. It had been denied because the online verification failed. "They are trying to build a debt profile," Doris whispered. I needed to be sure. The next time Savannah and Luke came over for Sunday brunch, I decided to test the waters. I deliberately poured coffee into my saucer instead of the cup and pretended to forget the word for napkin. I feel so foggy lately," I muttered, looking down. "I do not know what is happening to me." Savannah's eyes lit up. She exchanged a quick look with Luke. "Well, actually, Mom," she said, leaning in eagerly, "there are legal provisions for this. If a physician certifies incapacity, we can trigger the durable power of attorney immediately without a waiting period. It is really streamlined in this state." She knew the statutes. She knew the clauses. A frantic daughter-in-law does not know the specific legal triggers for immediate power of attorney. A predator does. As I watched her laughing with Luke later, pouring him more wine and whispering in his ear, the cold reality washed over me. I was not just a mother-in-law she found annoying. I was a target. And she was already lining up the shot. I decided that I would not fight back with rage. Rage is messy, and rage makes you look unstable, which was exactly what Savannah wanted. Instead, I decided to give her exactly what she was looking for. I began to play the role of the confused, fading old woman. I intentionally left my reading glasses in the refrigerator next to the milk carton. When Savannah came over, I would ask her the same question 3 or 4 times in the span of 20 minutes. "Savannah, dear, did you say we are having chicken for dinner? Or was it beef?" I asked one evening, blinking rapidly. I watched her eyes light up. It was subtle, but it was there, a gleam of triumph. She looked at Luke, then back at me with a smile that was too wide, too sharp. "Chicken, Mum. We just talked about this," she said, her voice dropping to that patronizing register one uses for toddlers. "Do not worry. I will handle the menu." While she was busy celebrating her victory, I was busy working. I drove to the bank branch on 4th Street, bypassing the online portal entirely. I sat down with a young account manager named David and asked for a hard copy of every single interaction on my account for the last 60 days. "Well, Mrs. Holloway, we show a call logged just yesterday morning," David said, tracing a line on the paper. "A woman identified as you called to inquire about the procedure for authorizing third-party bill payments." My blood ran cold. "David, I was in my garden all morning yesterday. I did not make that call. I had him print the caller log. The number did not belong to me, and it did not belong to Savannah. It traced back to a corporate entity listed as Helix Meridian Consulting. It sounded legitimate, professional, and terrifyingly vague. I took this information to Walter Green. Walter had been my late husband's lawyer for 30 years. He was semi-retired now, living in a quiet bungalow 2 towns over, but his mind was still a steel trap. He sat on his porch, reading the documents I had brought, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. "Maggie, listen to me closely," Walter said, taking off his glasses. "This is not just family drama. This is a coordinated effort to establish a pattern of incompetence. They are building a case. Helix Meridian. I have heard whispers. They operate on the fringe of wealth management. They specialize in aggressive asset restructuring." "Aggressive," I asked. "Predatory." Walter corrected himself. "They find assets that are equity-rich but cash-poor, like your house and land, and they leverage them. Maggie, I think you need to move your property into an irrevocable trust immediately. Lock it down." I hesitated. A trust was permanent. Not yet. "Walter, I need to know exactly who is pulling the strings. I need to know if Luke is a victim or a villain." I went home and dusted off my husband's old tablet. I spent 3 nights learning how to navigate the deeper corners of the search engines. I typed in Helix Meridian Consulting. The results were buried under layers of generic corporate speak. But I dug deeper. I found forums, consumer complaints, and civil lawsuit filings in 3 different states. They were accused of opaque fee structures and high-risk leveraging. I decided to poke the bear. I dialed the number for Helix that I had found on the bank log. Helix Meridian. "How may I direct your call?" A polished female voice answered. "Yes, this is Margaret Holloway," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I am returning a call regarding my account." There was a pause, the sound of typing, and then the receptionist's voice changed. It became warmer, more ingratiating. "Oh, yes, Mrs. Holloway. We are currently working with your son's family on the comprehensive asset optimization strategy for the next generation. Did you have a question about the papers your daughter-in-law is preparing?" The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. Savannah was not just trying to put me in a home. She was brokering my life's work to a firm that stripped assets for parts. I hung up the phone. I walked out onto my front porch and sat in my rocking chair. The sun was dipping below the Rockies, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and orange. I looked out at the land I had tended for 40 years. They saw a confused old woman who baked cookies and forgot where she put her keys. They had no idea who they were dealing with. If they think I only know how to nurse flowers and bake pies. I whispered to the empty air, my hands gripping the armrests until my knuckles turned white. They are going to be in for a shock when they realize I used to run a trauma center. The phone rang at 2 in the afternoon, shattering the silence of my living room. It was Walter. He did not waste time with pleasantries. Maggie. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Walter said, his voice sounding thinner and tighter than usual. I just got off the phone with a clerk at the county courthouse. A file was flagged this morning. It was submitted by a firm called Westview Legal Group. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I have never heard of them. I know, Walter replied, but they seem to know you. They attempted to file a petition for a voluntary limited guardianship. The clerk pulled it because the notary stamp looked smudged. But Maggie, there is a document attached. It claims you are voluntarily surrendering financial oversight to your son and daughter-in-law due to, and I quote, progressive cognitive decline. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. I never signed anything like that. There is a signature on it, Walter said grimly. It is a digital scan of your signature. It looks like it was lifted from an old tax return or a check. If the court accepts this document as valid, all they would need is a single medical opinion to finalize it. They could legally take control of your checkbook within 48 hours. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall. The audacity of it took my breath away. They were not just waiting for me to die. They were actively digging the grave while I was still walking around. Before I could even process the rage, my cell phone buzzed. It was the same number from Helix Meridian Consulting. I forced my breathing to slow down, put on my best confused old lady voice, and answered. Hello? I quavered. Mrs. Holloway. It is Jessica from Helix again. The voice chirped, sickeningly sweet. We were hoping to schedule a home visit this weekend. We have prepared a wonderful tax-saving strategy for the family, and we would love to sit down with you, Luke and Savannah, to explain how we can protect your assets. Oh, that sounds complicated, I stammered, letting a little tremor enter my voice. I do not know if I will understand it all. Do not worry at all, Jessica reassured me. Your children will be there to handle the details. We just need you present. It is for your benefit. Really. I agreed and hung up. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with terrifying clarity. Helix Meridian needed a signature to secure a high-risk investment, likely using my home as collateral. But they could not get that signature from me because I would never agree to mortgage my paid-off house. So, Savannah needed the court order. She needed to be me. 10 minutes later, Doris knocked on my back door. She looked agitated. Maggie. Do you know a man driving a silver sedan with a North Lake Valuation Services logo on the side? She asked, pulling me away from the window. No, I said. Well, he was parked across the street for 20 minutes, Doris hissed. He was taking photos of your house. I walked out to ask him what he was doing, and he sped off. Maggie. North Lake does appraisals for commercial loans, big ones. I sank into a kitchen chair. It was worse than I thought. This was not just about control. This was about debt. Luke and Savannah were in trouble, deep financial trouble, and they were planning to use my home, my sanctuary, as the life raft to keep themselves afloat. They were going to strip my equity, dump me in a facility that cost $5,000 a month, and pay for it by draining my savings until there was nothing left. I called Walter back. They are moving fast. Walter, I told him, relaying the information about Helix and the appraiser. Then we have to move faster, Walter said. You have two choices. We can fight this in court, which will drag on for months and cost you a fortune in legal fees, or we can lock the door before they even get the key. The trust, I said. The irrevocable trust, Walter corrected. We transfer the title of your house and your land into it. You name an independent trustee. Once it is done, the assets are no longer in your name. You cannot sign them away even if you wanted to, and neither can anyone holding a power of attorney. But if I do that, I said slowly, I lose control too. Technically, yes, Walter said, but you keep your home and you stop them dead in their tracks. If they try to leverage the house, the bank will laugh in their faces because Margaret Holloway does not own it anymore. The trust does. I looked down at my hands. They were wrinkled, spotted with age, but they were steady. I thought about Luke. I thought about him standing there while Savannah mocked me, saying nothing, doing nothing. He had made his choice. Prepare the papers. Walter, I said, my voice hardening. But do not file them publicly yet. I want everything ready to sign. I am going to let them think they have won. I want to see their faces when the trap snaps shut. Maggie. Are you sure you want to play it this way? Walter asked gently. It is dangerous. They tried to steal my life. Walter, I whispered, looking at the brown folder on my table where I kept my husband's death certificate. I am not just going to stop them. I am going to make sure they never forget who they messed with. The ink on the trust documents was barely dry when I started the next phase of my defense. I met Walter at a roadside diner 10 miles out of town, away from prying eyes. I signed away the legal title to my home to a non-profit organization dedicated to elder protection. It was a terrifying leap of faith, but looking at the notarized seal, I felt a strange sense of armor locking into place. To the outside world, nothing had changed. To the law, I was no longer a target worth hitting. Back home, I became a spy in my own living room. I ordered a set of miniature cameras online, tiny black cubes no bigger than a die. I asked the teenager next door, a quiet boy who fixed computers, to help me install them. We hid one in the spine of a hollowed-out encyclopedia on the bookshelf and another nestled in the fake ivy plant atop the kitchen cabinets. Every corner of the common areas was now under surveillance. Then, rehearsals began. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, practicing the art of selective forgetfulness. I had to walk a razor-thin line. I needed to appear confused enough to make Savannah overconfident, but lucid enough that no honest doctor would ever declare me incompetent. I practiced losing my train of thought mid-sentence. I practiced the vacant stare. On Wednesday, I baited the hook. I called Savannah. Savannah, dear, I am so overwhelmed with these insurance forms. I told her over the phone, letting my voice waver. I cannot find the one for the house. Could you come over and help me sort through the pile on my desk? She arrived within the hour, wearing that shark-like smile. As I fumbled with the kettle in the kitchen, pretending to struggle with the lid, I watched the live feed on my phone propped up behind the toaster. Savannah did not sort the papers. She went straight for the bottom drawer where I kept my cancelled checks. The camera in the bookshelf caught it all in high definition. She pulled out an old property tax document that had my full, clear signature at the bottom. She held it flat, took her phone out, and snapped a high-resolution photo. Then she typed a message, hit send, and slid the paper back exactly where she found it. Later that evening, I sat with Walter and a woman named Paula Ruiz. Paula was an ex-FBI agent who investigated financial crimes, now working privately. She was small, sharp, and terrifyingly efficient. She placed a thin folder on my coffee table. It is worse than we thought. Maggie, Paula said, her voice devoid of pity. I ran a forensic check on Helix Meridian and cross-referenced it with your son's recent activity. Luke is drowning. She opened the file. Luke bought into a commercial development in Texas 6 months ago, Paula explained. It was a speculative deal. The developer ran off with the seed money. Luke personally guaranteed the construction loan. He owes $300,000, due in full within 3 weeks. Or he faces bankruptcy and a fraud investigation. I felt the air leave my lungs. And Savannah is rich on social media, but poor in reality. Paula continued. Her trust fund has strict dispersal clauses. Her father froze her access 6 months ago because he did not approve of her spending. They are cash poor. Maggie. They are living on credit cards and appearances. It all made sense. The desperation. The rush. They needed a fresh asset to leverage against the Texas debt. My house, with its paid-off mortgage and high market value, was the only thing left they could touch. So I am not a mother to them, I said, staring at the grainy image of Savannah photographing my signature. I am just liquidity. You are the bailout, Paula confirmed. I closed the folder. My hand trembled, not from age, but from a cold, hard resolve. I was not just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting to teach them that some things in this world cannot be liquidated. The call from the Helix Meridian office came on a Thursday morning. Jessica, the receptionist with the voice like spun sugar, proposed a family consultation over the weekend to finalize the asset strategy. Savannah was on the other line, practically vibrating with excitement. Luke was quieter, offering only monosyllabic agreements. I decided it was time to change the venue. Actually, Jessica, I said, interrupting her flow. This Sunday is the 45th anniversary of the day Luke's father and I bought this land. I am hosting a dinner. Why do we not do the consultation? Then we can celebrate and, well, handle business at the same time. Savannah jumped at the idea. To her, this was not just a meeting, it was a stage. She saw a golden opportunity to close the deal in front of the extended family, proving to everyone that she was the capable matriarch taking charge of a failing estate. On Friday, 2 days before the dinner, Paula sent me a secure file. It was a digital copy of an email Savannah had sent to her contact at Helix. I stared at the screen, my stomach churning as I read the words. Once we have the court order regarding my mother-in-law's capacity next week, the transfer will be simple. We can use the property to release the collateral bond immediately. There it was, in black and white. Proof that this was a premeditated strike. I printed the email on heavy bond paper. I folded it carefully and slid it into a thick manila envelope. I placed the envelope right in the middle of the dining table, buried casually beneath a stack of junk mail and old magazines, hidden in plain sight. The next guest to arrive was not family. Lieutenant Harris was a man with a kind face and eyes that missed nothing. He was from the county's Elder Protection Unit. He shook my hand firmly at the door. For tonight, I am just Ted, an old friend of Walter's, Harris said quietly, patting his jacket pocket where a legal recording device was running. We are here to keep you safe, Maggie. If they push you, we step in. Let them push, I whispered. I want them to commit. By 6:00, my house felt like occupied territory. Savannah swept in, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, barking orders at Luke as if he were hired help. Luke, put the wine on the sideboard. Not the table, she commanded, not even looking at him. Then she turned to my cousin, Sarah, flashing a brilliant, predatory smile. "Oh, you are going to love the brochure for the new facility. Sarah. It has a heated pool and even a yoga studio for seniors. It is basically a resort." Dinner was a blur of clinking silverware and Savannah's voice. She held court at the center of the table, steering every conversation back to the incompetence of the elderly. It is honestly tragic how easily the elderly are manipulated these days, Savannah said, shaking her head with mock sadness as she cut her steak. "I was reading about a scam just yesterday. Children stealing from their parents, it is disgusting. That is why I told Luke. We have to step up. We have to be the ones to protect Maggie from the wolves." I took a sip of water to hide the grimace that threatened to break my mask. The irony was so thick I could practically taste it. "You are a good daughter-in-law." "Savannah," my neighbor Doris said, her voice dripping with sarcasm that Savannah was too arrogant to catch. "I try, Doris. I really do." Savannah sighed, placing a hand over her heart. Then, the moment arrived. The plates were cleared. Savannah stood up, tapping her glass with a spoon. The room fell silent. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a thick, bound document. It was covered in legal tabs and highlighted sections. "Since we are all here," Savannah announced, her voice booming with authority, "I wanted to share some wonderful news. Luke and I have been working night and day to secure a financial plan that ensures Mum is taken care of for the rest of her life." She walked around the table, placing the document in front of me. She opened it to the signature page. "It is a little technical," she said, looking down at me with eyes that were hard as flint. "But basically, this structure protects you from, well, from yourself. It puts the heavy lifting in our hands." I looked at the papers. I looked at the pen she placed near my hand. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands were still. I looked up at Lieutenant Harris, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. I realized something then. When a person believes they have already won, they talk far more than they should. Savannah thought she was taking a victory lap, but she was just walking onto the trapdoor. I took a breath, ready to pull the lever. Savannah began her performance. She paced around the dining table, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with a rhythmic, military precision. She opened the folder and pointed to a series of charts that meant absolutely nothing to the cousins and neighbors gathered around the roast beef. She used words like liquidity, broad power of attorney, and joint guarantee liability, tossing them into the air like confetti, relying on the fact that most people at the table were too polite or too intimidated to admit they did not understand a single word. "Basically," Savannah said, her voice smooth and practiced, "this restructures the estate so that we can maximize the tax efficiency. It is all for your benefit. Mum, we just want to make sure the government does not take what is yours." She slid a heavy stack of papers directly in front of me. The paper was thick, expensive. She uncapped a heavy Mont Blanc pen and placed it gently in my right hand, her fingers lingering on mine for a second too long. "You just need to sign right here," she said, tapping a line marked with a sticky tab. "And here. And initial the bottom of page 4. Then all your worries about bills, the nursing home costs, and medical fees will just disappear." I looked at the paper, letting my hand hover uncertainly over the line. I looked up at her, widening my eyes. "Savannah, if I sign this, does that mean I can still decide if I want to sell the house or if I want to stay?" Savannah laughed, a light, tinkling sound that did not reach her eyes. She placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just a little too hard. "Oh, Mama M," she cooed, using that nickname she knew I detested. "You do not need to worry about those big decisions anymore. That is why Luke and I are here. We take that burden off your shoulders. You just relax." I frowned, looking down at the document again. "But what about my donations? You know I send $50 to the animal shelter every month. If I want to write them a check." "Do I have to ask you first?" Savannah's smile twitched. She was getting impatient. She glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at me. "Well, yes," she said, her tone sharpening slightly. "Technically, all expenditures would have to go through Luke and me for approval. The lawyer said it is the only way to ensure full protection. We cannot have money just leaking out." Lieutenant Harris, sitting 3 seats down, quietly picked up his water glass and took a sip. I saw his eyes dart to the recording device in his pocket. She had just admitted to the room that the goal was total control. A murmur went through the table. My cousin Sarah shifted in her chair. "Wait," Sarah said, frowning. "So Maggie would have to ask permission to buy dog food." Savannah whipped her head around, her eyes flashing. "It is a standard legal safeguard. Sarah, do not make it sound like a prison. It is financial stewardship." The air in the room grew heavy. Even the most oblivious relatives were sensing that something was wrong. The roast beef was getting cold, and the tension was thick enough to choke on. I knew I had to push her further. I had to get her to lie about the money. I set the pen down. I looked up at her with a look of pure, innocent admiration. "You are so smart to handle all of this, Savannah," I said softly. "I know how busy you are, especially with that new, what did you call it when we were having wine last week? That big investment in Dallas. Savannah froze for a microsecond, then preened. She could not help herself. The opportunity to brag in front of Luke's boring country family was too tempting. "Oh, that," she said, waving a hand dismissively but puffing out her chest. "Yes, it is a massive commercial development. We are looking at a 40% return in the first quarter. It is going to put us in a different league." "That sounds wonderful," I said, keeping my voice steady and even. "But I was wondering. You know how I worry. If that deal in Dallas, if it were to have a problem, would that company, Helix, ask for the money back? Did they ask you for any, what is the word, security?" I saw Luke stiffen. He stopped chewing. He stared at his wife, his face pale. Savannah laughed again, but this time it sounded brittle. She looked around the table, ensuring everyone was watching her success story. "Oh, Mom, you really do not understand how high-level finance works," she said, shaking her head. "There is no risk like that. And no, absolutely not. There is no security or collateral involved. It is purely a liquidity play." "So," I pressed, leaning forward just an inch, "you did not have to promise them anything. Nothing at all." "No?" Savannah lied, looking me dead in the eye without blinking. "Nothing? Now, pick up the pen. Maggie, we are wasting time." I looked at her. She had just lied twice in under 2 minutes. She had lied to me. She had lied to the family. And most importantly, she had lied to the camera hidden in the ivy plant behind her. I took a deep breath. I could feel the adrenaline cooling in my veins. sharpening my focus. The trap was set. The bait was taken. "Okay," I whispered. I pushed the papers away from me. The sound of the heavy paper sliding across the wood was the only sound in the room. I folded my hands on the table and looked at the woman who thought she owned me. It was time to ask the question. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating, the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. I did not look down. I did not fidget. I sat perfectly still, watching the colour drain out of Savannah's face until she looked like a wax statue. I gently placed the heavy Mont Blanc pen on the table and pushed the stack of documents away from me. It slid across the polished wood with a hiss that sounded like a snake. Then I looked directly into my daughter-in-law's eyes. "Savannah," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a cold wind. "If this is all purely to help Mom, then why did you send an email to Helix exactly 3 weeks ago that read, 'Once the court confirms my mother-in-law lacks capacity, we will release the collateral assets to prevent the Dallas project from defaulting'?" The reaction was instantaneous. Savannah flinched as if I had slapped her across the face. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Beside her, Luke dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against his china plate, the sound echoing like a gunshot. My cousins and neighbours exchanged wide-eyed glances, the air in the room suddenly electric with tension. Walter and Lieutenant Harris sat back, their faces grim, watching the scene unfold. "Who?" Savannah whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. "Who told you that? Who showed you that email I reached for the thick manila envelope that had been sitting under the junk mail all evening?" I pulled out the printed email, complete with the Helix logo and the timestamp. I slid it to the center of the table. Nobody had to tell me. "Savannah?" I said calmly. "You were so busy looking at the price of my furniture that you forgot to look at who was sitting on it." Luke snatched the paper. His eyes scanned the text, and his face went from pale to a sickly shade of grey. He looked up at his wife, his expression twisting into horror. "Savannah," Luke asked, his voice cracking. "You told me she agreed. You told me Mom wanted to help us with the bridge loan. You said she was on board." Savannah stood up, knocking her chair back. Her composure shattered completely. "I had to," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "We are drowning. Luke, if we do not secure that collateral by Friday, the whole deal implodes. Our house, the cars, my trust fund. It is all gone. We needed the signature." "So you decided to steal it?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. "It is not stealing," she yelled, gesturing wildly at the papers. "You are old. You do not need this land. We are the ones with a future. I just needed the judge to sign the order so we could save everything." "And that brings me to my second question," I interrupted, staring her down. "That appointment with Dr. Evans that you tried so hard to schedule for me last week, was that actually to check my blood pressure? Or was it to get the medical report certifying mild dementia that you needed to complete your fraud application?" The room gasped. My cousin Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, looking at Savannah with disgust. "I heard you on the phone in the hallway earlier. You told someone." "She forgets everything. Just tell the doctor to write it down." "I thought you were talking about a patient, not your mother-in-law." Savannah looked around the room, realizing she was cornered. Her eyes were wild, darting from face to face. She turned on Luke, baring her teeth. Do not look at me like that, she hissed at him. You knew we needed money. You are the one who tanked the Texas deal. You are the one who put us in this hole. I knew we needed money, Luke shouted back, standing up to face her. I knew we were asking Mum for help, but I did not know you forged her signature on a court petition. I did not know you were trying to have her declared incompetent. You are pathetic. Savannah spat. I did what had to be done. I slammed my hand down on the table. The sound stopped their screaming match instantly. I stood up, drawing myself up to my full height. I was no longer the frail old lady. I was the woman who had run an emergency room for 30 years. Stop it, I commanded. Both of you. I am not the confused, senile old woman you think I am. I have been recording this house for weeks. I have every lie, every threat, and every plan on tape. I looked at Savannah, then at Luke. And as for this house, I said, my voice steady and final, you are too late. I transferred the entire estate, the land, and the accounts into an irrevocable trust last week. I do not own it anymore. The trust does. And the trustee is an organization that protects the elderly from predators like you. I leaned forward, my hands resting on the table, looking at the ruins of their scheme scattered across the dinner plates. So I am going to call this what it really is. I said, this is not family business. This is elder abuse. This is fraud. And this is betrayal. As the last echo of my accusation hung in the air, the man we knew as Ted stood up. He reached into his jacket pocket, but this time, he did not pull out a phone. He pulled out a badge that caught the light of the chandelier. I am Detective Harris with the County Elder Protection Unit, he announced, his voice stripping away the friendly facade he had worn all evening. Mrs. Holloway, as per your consent and the judicial warrant we obtained based on the evidence provided by your attorney, this entire conversation has been recorded. Savannah lunged for the papers on the table, her fingernails scratching against the wood. But Harris was faster. He placed a heavy hand over the file. Do not touch that, Harris ordered. That is evidence of intent to commit fraud and forgery. Savannah recoiled, her face crumbling into a mask of sheer panic. This is a misunderstanding. It is a family dispute. You have no right to be here. We have every right, Harris replied, pulling a pair of cuffs from his belt. We are looking at charges of conspiracy to commit financial abuse of a vulnerable adult, forgery of legal documents, and attempted grand larceny. You and your husband will need to come down to the station to answer some questions. Luke collapsed into his chair. He looked small, broken, and utterly defeated. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, his hands shaking so hard they rattled against the table. Mum, please, Luke begged, his voice cracking. Do not let them take us. It will ruin me. I will lose my license. I will lose everything. We were just desperate. I did not want to hurt you. I looked at my son. For a heartbeat, I saw the little boy who used to scrape his knees climbing the oak tree in the backyard. I felt that ancient, biological pull to protect him, to wave my hand and make the bad men go away, to absorb his pain so he did not have to feel it. But then I remembered the silence. I remembered the times he sat at this very table and said nothing while his wife called me senile. I remembered the email. I remembered that he was willing to let me be locked away in a facility, medicated and forgotten, just so he could keep his country club membership and his wife's approval. I looked at Harris, then back at Luke. You did not want to hurt me, I asked softly. Luke, you were going to erase me. I was scared, Luke sobbed. Savannah said it was the only way. She said you would not understand the debt. I understood plenty. I said, I understood that you made a choice. I took a step closer to him. The room was deadly silent. My cousins, my neighbors, even the detective waited. Luke, I said, my voice steady but heavy with a grief that felt like a stone in my chest. I have one last question for you. In all those nights you lay awake worrying about your debt, did you ever ask yourself, even once, between saving your career and saving your mother's life, which one you had chosen? Luke opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, but he could not say it. He could not say he chose me, because he hadn't. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating, answering the question louder than any confession ever could. I closed my eyes for a second, accepting the heartbreak. Then I opened them and turned to Detective Harris. I want everything on the record. Detective, I said, my voice raspy but clear. I will cooperate fully. I am choosing to protect myself. Even if the price is watching my son face the consequences of his own actions. Harris nodded solemnly. He read them their rights. I watched as they were led out the front door. Savannah screaming threats about lawsuits. Luke weeping silently with his head bowed. The flashing red and blue lights from the squad cars painted the living room walls in violent, rhythmic strokes until they finally pulled away, leaving the house in darkness. I walked out onto the front porch. The night air was crisp and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm. I was alone. There would be no more Sunday dinners with Luke. No more pretending. No more family holidays. My heart ached with a hollow, throbbing pain. But as I placed my hand on the rough, wooden railing of the porch my husband and I had built with our own hands, I felt something else underneath the grief. I felt safe. I looked out at the silhouette of the Rockies against the moonlit sky. I had lost my son, but I had kept my dignity. I had kept my home. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can connect. If you believe in standing up for yourself, please hit that subscribe button for Grandma's Family Diary, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it.